Every nurse in East River Medical moved with quiet purpose, but when Alyssa Coleman entered the cardiac wing, the air shifted, subtle but undeniable. It was 6:47 a.m. when she stepped out of the staff elevator, her white uniform immaculately pressed, her natural curls pulled back into a bun that somehow looked both effortless and purposeful. The overnight team was just finishing rounds, bleary-eyed but alert, handing off the chaos of the night to the fresh energy of the morning crew. Fluorescent lights bathed the hall in a pale glow, and the scent of antiseptic mingled with the rich aroma of coffee drifting from the Hudson Perk Cafe in the lobby downstairs. To the untrained eye, Alyssa looked like any other young nurse ready to start her shift. But there was a certain intentionality to her steps, a sharpness in her gaze, and an ease in how she navigated the unit, as if she'd walked these halls for years, not months. She greeted people by name. She asked about patients she wasn't assigned to. She knew where the backup supplies were kept and when the elevators were slow. She was new, but she didn't move like someone new. "Morning, Alyssa," said Linda Morales, glancing up from the nurse's station as she sipped the last of her lukewarm coffee. "Morning, Linda," Alyssa replied with a soft smile. "How was the overnight?" "Usual drama. Mr. Holt in 810 got restless again around 3. Had to remind him for the 4th time that he's not supposed to walk alone. Patterson in 802 needs vitals, and Dr. Whitman wants all the med recon forms done before 9. Alyssa nodded, already pulling up patient charts on her tablet. "Mrs. Patterson's on digitalis, right?" Linda raised an eyebrow. "Yeah. Why?" "Just wondering if her potassium was checked overnight. Hypokalemia can cause digoxin toxicity. I'll make sure it's updated." There was a pause as Linda studied her. In her 15 years on the cardiac floor, she'd seen hundreds of young nurses, some sharp, some green, some cocky, some scared. Alyssa didn't fit any of those molds. She was composed, too composed maybe. Most fresh-out-of-school RNs were still finding their footing, but Alyssa moved like she belonged. "Where'd you learn that?" Linda asked. "Cardiac pharmacology's a bit of a hobby," Alyssa said casually, her eyes scanning the vitals from the overnight logs. "Digitalis inhibits the sodium-potassium pump. Low potassium makes the drug more potent. It's an easy detail to miss." Linda blinked. "You get that in nursing school?" Alyssa gave a half shrug. "Not really. I read a lot." By the time she walked toward room 802, Linda was still watching her, a curious crease in her brow. Alyssa had something, more than textbook knowledge, clinical thinking, a kind of instinct, honed in a way that didn't match her age or resume. Meanwhile, in an office overlooking the floor, Dr. Charles Whitman stood behind his desk, blinds half drawn, coffee cooling on the windowsill. He'd been watching her, too. At 48, Whitman had built a reputation on discipline, hierarchy, and results. He ran his unit like a tightly wound machine, efficient, respected, and feared. In his world, everyone had a role, and that role did not include questioning those above you, especially not nurses, especially not young, black, female nurses who walked through his hallways with too much knowledge in their eyes. From the moment Alyssa arrived 6 months earlier, he'd noticed the way she held herself, how she carried confidence like a second stethoscope. She was polite, yes, but not deferent. Her chart notes were meticulous. Her interactions with families showed insight beyond protocol. She asked questions, good ones, but always with an undertone that unsettled him. She didn't just want to know what to do. She wanted to know why, and she didn't seem to think he had all the answers. He watched as she checked on Mrs. Patterson, calmly but thoroughly. She adjusted an IV line with swift, practiced fingers, smiled at the patient, noted something in the chart, and exited the room without a pause. Whitman turned back to her file, flipping through it for the 3rd, or maybe the 13th time. Alyssa Naomi Coleman, 21 years old, graduated top of her class from Columbia's accelerated nursing program. Stellar recommendations, No disciplinary flags, no complaints, no special connections, no red flags, and yet he closed the folder slowly. Out on the floor, Alyssa moved on to her next patient. Her steps were deliberate, her tone gentle but authoritative. She explained procedures to families, updated colleagues without condescension, and never wasted motion. She spoke to techs the same way she did to doctors, with clarity, focus, and purpose. Later that morning, a minor alarm sounded from room 807. Nothing dramatic, just a vitals blip from a patient post-surgery. Alyssa was the first to reach the bedside. She didn't panic. She assessed, checked the monitor, reviewed the chart, and noted a medication adjustment from the night before that didn't quite make sense based on the patient's labs. Linda arrived a moment later, scanning the monitor. "That rate's borderline." "Yeah," Alyssa said, "and his bun's elevated. I'm wondering if the beta blocker dose is too high considering his kidney function." Linda frowned. "You're sure?" "No," Alyssa replied evenly, "but it's worth flagging before the dose is repeated." Across the hall, Dr. Whitman emerged just in time to hear the tail end of the conversation. His face remained neutral, but his eyes narrowed ever so slightly. By noon, Alyssa had rounded on half her patients and assisted with 2 unexpected assessments. She hadn't taken a break. She hadn't complained. She hadn't faltered. But she had been noticed. By everyone. Back at the nurse's station, Linda slid a granola bar toward her. "Eat. Even super nurses need glucose." Alyssa grinned. "Thanks, Linda." "You always this dialed in?" Alyssa shrugged. "Just trying to be useful." Linda nodded slowly, then leaned in just a little. "Be careful, though." "Of what?" "Being too good. Around here, that makes people nervous." Alyssa's smile faded slightly. "You mean Dr. Whitman?" Linda didn't answer, but her silence said enough. At 3 p.m., as Alyssa was reviewing the med list for a new admission, she heard her name echo down the hallway. "Coleman, in my office, now." She turned, saw Dr. Whitman standing stiffly in his doorway, arms crossed. Every nurse in the hallway paused. Even the monitors seemed to quiet. Alyssa didn't rush. She finished her note, saved it, and walked toward his office with the same calm pace she always used. Inside, the door clicked shut. Whitman didn't offer a seat. "You're very confident." "I try to be prepared," she said evenly. "You're young, Coleman. This is your first job out of school. And yet, you've corrected physicians, flagged medication issues, stepped beyond your role." "My job is to protect patients," she replied. "Your job is to follow orders." A beat passed. "I've never disobeyed an order," she said. "You've danced on the edge of insubordination," he snapped. "Don't think I haven't noticed. This unit runs on structure, on respect. If you can't accept your place here, you won't last long." Alyssa didn't flinch. She didn't argue. She only said, "I understand." Whitman stared at her, waiting for something. Apology, fear, submission. He got none. Finally, he leaned forward. "Watch yourself, Nurse Coleman." She nodded, stood tall, and turned for the door. As she walked out, he muttered under his breath, "She's going to be a problem." And just like that, the battle began. "You're just a nurse. Remember that," Dr. Charles Whitman said, low but loud enough for half the cardiac wing to hear. The words hung in the air like static electricity. Alyssa Coleman stood at the foot of Mr. Chen's bed, her chart still in hand, the monitor behind her beeping a steady rhythm that belied the tension now pulsing through the room. Linda Morales, mid-sentence with a medication tech, froze. Dr. Michelle Ewan's hand, halfway to the IV pump, paused. Mr. Chen, a 73-year-old post-bypass patient, looked from Alyssa to Whitman, confused and wide-eyed. "Is everything okay?" Alyssa turned to the patient with a practiced smile. "You're doing fine, Mr. Chen. We're just making sure everything is set before the evening meds." But the smile faded the moment she faced Dr. Whitman again. "This is not the place, doctor," she said evenly. Whitman didn't blink. "Then let's talk in the hallway." Outside the room, the door closed behind them with a soft click. The hallway was unusually still for a Tuesday afternoon. A couple of techs lingered at the nurses' station. A junior resident quickly turned and walked away. "You disregarded protocol," Whitman began, his voice sharp and measured. "You flagged a medication issue to a physician who wasn't even assigned to the patient." Mr. Chen was in distress. His blood pressure dropped below baseline, his EKG showed irregularities, and his renal function was impaired. The dosage of amiodarone hadn't been adjusted. I voiced a concern. "You interpreted lab results," he snapped. "That's not your scope. That's practicing medicine without a license." "I reported clinical observations to the attending on call," Alyssa replied. Dr. Yuen agreed and adjusted the dose. "Because she was boxed into it by your interference." The silence between them crackled with something unspoken. It wasn't just about medication. It never had been. "Patient safety should be our shared priority," Alyssa said calmly. Whitman leaned in slightly. "Your priority is to stay in your lane, not to show off what you think you know. This is a hospital, not a classroom, and you're not here to teach anyone. I wasn't." "Then why are residents quoting you? Why are families asking for you? Why is every damn doctor on this floor starting to second-guess their protocols after talking to a nurse who hasn't even been here a year?" Alyssa didn't answer. She knew he didn't want one. "You're undermining authority. Mine, and that ends today." He turned and walked away without waiting for her response. Back inside Mr. Chen's room, Linda was adjusting the monitor leads, her jaw tight. "You okay?" she asked quietly as Alyssa re-entered. "I will be," Alyssa replied, checking Mr. Chen's vitals. "Let's just make sure he is too." The rest of the afternoon unfolded under a fog of quiet tension. Alyssa continued her rounds, responded to a minor emergency in room 811, and helped a new nurse get through an IV start. But the weight of Whitman's words lingered, like the sting from a slap no one else saw. By 4:30 p.m., she was charting at the station when Linda slid into the seat next to her, her expression unreadable. "Whitman's on the warpath," she said under her breath. "I heard him talking to Ellison." "About me? Who else?" Alyssa tapped the screen slowly, finishing a note. "He's building a case." Linda sighed. "You're not wrong, but you know how this works. They won't write you up for being smarter than him. They'll wait until you miss a chart or clock in late or skip a handoff." "I know." "Then be careful." At 5:10, the unit descended into controlled chaos again. Mr. Chen's monitor screamed a new rhythm, fast, irregular, dangerous. Alyssa and Linda were at his bedside in seconds. Blood pressure, 90/58. Skin, clammy, breathing, shallow. Dr. Yuen appeared moments later. "Talk to me." "BP dropped fast," Alyssa reported. "EKG suggests ventricular arrhythmia. I reviewed his labs this morning. His potassium and magnesium were borderline." Yuen nodded, adjusting the settings. "Let's get a stat panel. Start fluids. Call pharmacy. He may need a dose adjustment." Dr. Whitman's arrival this time was swifter, his tone already bitter. "What's going on here?" "VTAC," Yuen said. "Possibly drug-induced. Coleman flagged his electrolytes earlier. We're correcting and adjusting." Whitman's eyes snapped to Alyssa. "Did you order a panel?" "No," Yuen cut in. "I did, based on her observation." "She's doing it again," Whitman said to Yuen, ignoring Alyssa. "Practicing beyond her role. How long are we going to allow this?" Yuen glanced between them, then spoke carefully. "Her assessment helped prevent a crash. I stand by my call." Whitman stepped toward Alyssa, lowering his voice. "This is your last warning." "I followed protocol," she replied, just as low. "Don't push me." She stared back at him, her voice even. "Then you'd better prepare the paperwork." The words were soft, but they cut through the hallway like glass breaking. A few nurses nearby froze. Even Linda stopped mid-charting. Whitman's face tightened, the vein at his temple pulsing slightly. He turned on his heel and walked away. Back at the nurses' station, Linda whistled low. "Damn!" Alyssa sat down slowly, fingers still steady, eyes still calm. "You just drew the line in the sand," Linda said. "Someone had to." But even as she turned back to her notes, Alyssa knew the storm hadn't passed. It had only just. The following morning began under gray skies. Rain drizzled steadily against the tall windows of East River Medical, casting soft shadows across the lobby floor. Alyssa arrived 15 minutes early as usual. She greeted the receptionist, nodded at the security guard, and rode the elevator up to the cardiac floor in silence. When she stepped out, something felt off. The break room was unusually quiet. The whiteboard that listed staff assignments and patient loads had been updated. Alyssa scanned it quickly and paused. 3 back-to-back shifts, Friday through Sunday. All evening to night transitions, no breaks in between. Linda, who normally worked weekends, had been moved off the schedule. 2 other nurses who had recently finished onboarding were now assigned to her usual rotation. Alyssa frowned. "Change of scenery?" came a voice from behind her. She turned to see Karen Ellison, clipboard in hand. "I didn't request these shifts," Alyssa said calmly. "It's not a request," Karen replied, not unkindly, but without sympathy either. Dr. Whitman made the schedule changes. He felt some reorganization was necessary. "For what reason?" Karen's tone shifted slightly. "Alyssa, I need to be honest with you. There have been some concerns about boundaries, about professionalism." "Professionalism?" "There are notes, chart comments from colleagues, concerns about overstepping clinical lines. Nothing official yet, but when senior staff raise flags, it's our responsibility to pay attention." Alyssa's jaw tightened. "May I see these notes?" "They're confidential." "Of course they are." Karen lowered her voice. "I know you're smart. I know you're good at what you do. But sometimes being good isn't enough. Sometimes it's about knowing when not to stand out." Alyssa looked at her steadily. "Is that what this is? I stood out too much?" Karen didn't answer. She turned and walked away, leaving the air thick behind her. By midday, Alyssa had worked through 2 full rounds, skipped lunch, and handled a minor code in room 804. Her charting was flawless. Her care was careful, precise, but the weight on her shoulders grew heavier with each passing hour. At 2:15 p.m. CI, Linda found her in the supply room. "You saw the new schedule?" Alyssa nodded. 3 night shifts, no support, new techs. "Yeah, that's not a coincidence." "I figured." Linda glanced around before stepping closer. "He's doing it, Alyssa. He's building a file, making you look reckless, disruptive. He'll have a hard time proving it." Linda hesitated. "He won't need to prove it. He just needs enough noise that no one bothers looking deeper." Alyssa exhaled slowly. "So what should I do? Quit?" "No, that's what he wants." "Then what?" Linda studied her carefully. "Whatever you're going to do it smart. Because he's not just targeting your job, he's targeting your name." The words stayed with Alyssa for the rest of the day. At 6:03 p.m., as she was helping a patient's daughter navigate post-discharge instructions, she noticed Dr. Whitman standing at the nurse's station. He was flipping through a file, but his eyes weren't on the pages. They were on her. She held his gaze for just a moment. Not long, just enough. Later, while charting in the break room, she pulled out her phone and scrolled down to a contact labeled Dad. Her finger hovered over the call button. Not yet, she thought. She wasn't ready to make that call. Not while she still had options. Not while she still believed she could fight this the right way. But somewhere deep down, she already knew. The moment was coming. And when it did, everything would change. The schedule posted on the break room board Thursday morning wasn't just a list. It was a message. Clear, cold, deliberate. Alyssa stared at it for a full 10 seconds before stepping closer. 3 12-hour night shifts in a row, back to back. No relief coverage. No tech assigned to her side of the wing. One shift overlapped with a system-wide supply inventory, a logistical nightmare even for veteran nurses. Linda stood beside her, coffee in hand, lips pursed. They're not even pretending anymore. Alyssa didn't reply. 3 reds and no help? Linda muttered. That's not a schedule. That's a setup. She wasn't wrong. Red patients, those with complex post-operative needs or high-risk cardiac conditions, required the most attention, and being assigned 3 of them, during nights, with no assistant nurse or tech, wasn't normal. It was sabotage dressed as scheduling. Across the room, Dr. Whitman passed by without a glance, as though the schedule was simply an administrative formality. Alyssa's shift began at 7:00 p.m. sharp. By 7:30, she had already done vitals, checked meds, reviewed notes, and responded to a call light from Mr. Talbot, a heart failure patient struggling with fluid retention. By 9:00, she was sweating, not from the workload, but from the pacing. She couldn't afford to slow down. The supply cart was half empty. The backup oxygen tank was missing. The printer at her station jammed 3 times. The system for logging patient meds crashed, forcing her to do things manually for 2 full hours. At 10:15, she walked briskly into the break room, poured herself water, and leaned back against the counter. Linda peeked in a moment later. "You're halfway through hell." "I've had worse clinical days," Alyssa said. "Yeah," Linda said, "but not with someone waiting for you to screw up." Alyssa took a sip, then asked quietly, "Has this happened before?" Linda paused. "Not like this. He's gone after nurses before, but this is concentrated, controlled. He's trying to shake you." "I'm not shaking." "No, but he wants to prove you're disruptive, reckless, too bold for your own good." Alyssa's eyes stayed fixed on her water cup. "So what do I do? Keep working? Pretend it's normal?" Linda shrugged. "Either you burn out or you burn through. Depends how long you can hold the line." Just after midnight, the hospital system flagged a late admission. Mr. Ronald Haskell, 66, post-angioplasty, transferred from another facility, medication records incomplete, no advance notice, no support. Alyssa reviewed what little she could. He was on antiarrhythmics and a mild anticoagulant, but the chart didn't reflect the most recent labs. She flagged the inconsistency, documented the risk, and called pharmacy to confirm. Twice. It was 2:34 a.m. when the error happened. A meds tech brought the wrong dosage, 2 tabs instead of 1. Alyssa caught it, corrected it, and wrote it into the log. But Whitman's system check the next morning still noted the discrepancy. The only record of correction was Alyssa's handwritten chart. The tech didn't back her up. Later that day, she was called to the administrative floor. The office was sterile, cool gray walls, a narrow window, and 3 people seated behind a long desk. Karen Ellison from HR, Whitman, and another administrator she'd only met once before. Karen began with a tired smile. "Alyssa, we've had some recent concerns." Whitman remained silent, his expression unreadable. "The late charting," the admin added, flipping a file, "and the medication variance with Mr. Haskell's prescription." "I caught that variance," Alyssa said firmly, "documented it and alerted pharmacy. The system didn't log the update because of a network error. I filed a tech ticket." Karen hesitated. "Still, the risk to the patient was—" "There was no risk to the patient," Alyssa cut in, voice calm but unyielding. "I intervened before the dose was administered. The log reflects it." Whitman finally spoke. "This is becoming a pattern." "What pattern?" she asked. "Interference, circumventing protocol, questioning physicians. My job is to advocate for patient safety. Your job is to follow direction." There it was again. Karen interrupted gently. "This isn't a formal reprimand, just a discussion. We wanted to make sure you understood the concerns." "I understand," Alyssa said, standing. "I also understand that this meeting wasn't really about protocol. It was about power." Karen's eyes flickered. Whitman's jaw clenched. Outside, Alyssa didn't go straight back to the floor. She walked out of the building entirely and into the late morning sun. It was warm finally, spring giving way to early summer, but she didn't feel it. She sat on the bench outside Hudson Perk Cafe and stared at her phone. Dad. Her thumb hovered over the screen. Not yet. She wasn't broken. Not yet. That night, her shift was quieter. The system held. No surprise admissions, no deliberate omissions. But the feeling lingered that she was walking through a house rigged to collapse at any moment. At 3:00 a.m., Linda brought her a sandwich. "You need to sleep eventually," she said. "I'll sleep when he's finished," Alyssa replied. "You really think he'll stop?" "No," she said, her voice low. "I think he's about to get sloppy." And she was right. Because the next morning, Whitman filed an official report, and that's when everything changed. Effective immediately, your employment at East River Medical is terminated. The words struck Alyssa like a slap, but she didn't flinch. She sat across from Dr. Charles Whitman in the administrative conference room, hands folded neatly in her lap, posture upright. To her left sat Karen Ellison from HR, expression carefully neutral. On the other side of the table, a hospital compliance officer she didn't recognize flipped slowly through a folder, as though Alyssa's future could be determined by the shuffle of a few papers. "On what grounds?" Alyssa asked, her voice calm. Whitman cleared his throat. "Insubordination, disregard for protocol, repeated overstepping of professional boundaries." "I've followed protocol," she said evenly. "Every time. I've documented every step, every call, every decision." Karen spoke next, softer. "There's also the matter of staff morale. We've received multiple anonymous complaints." "Anonymous," Alyssa repeated. "Convenient." "The environment on the floor has become tense," Karen continued. "Several staff have reported feeling second-guessed, even intimidated by your assertiveness." "Assertiveness," Alyssa said, turning the word over like a pebble in her mouth. "We've given you opportunities to adjust your approach," Whitman cut in, "but it's become clear that your presence is disruptive. This unit needs cohesion, trust, chain of command." "This unit needs accountability," she replied. "And integrity," Whitman's eyes narrowed, "which is why we're making this decision." There was silence, cold, sterile silence, that filled the room like vapor. Alyssa slowly reached into her bag and pulled out a slim binder. She placed it on the table, slid it across to Karen. "What's this?" Karen asked. "Printed documentation, every chart I've flagged, every correction I've made, every communication I logged, with timestamps, copies of system tickets filed when electronic records failed, a full incident report on Mr. Haskell's med discrepancy, backed by a follow-up from pharmacy." Karen opened it slowly. Whitman didn't touch it. "Everything I've done has been to protect patients. You know that," Alyssa said, her voice steady. "But you've chosen to punish transparency instead of rewarding it." "This isn't personal, Ms. Coleman," Whitman said coldly. "Isn't it?" she asked. Another silence. Longer this time, denser. Alyssa stood. Karen moved to speak, but Alyssa held up a hand. "I won't argue with this process. I understand how systems like this work. I understand what it means to challenge the wrong people." She reached into her bag again, pulled out her phone. "This," she said, "is the part where I'm supposed to leave quietly." Whitman crossed his arms. "But I won't." She unlocked her phone, tapped a contact. It began to ring. The room fell deathly still. After 2 rings, a voice answered, deep, calm, and unmistakably authoritative. "Alyssa?" "Hi, Dad," she said, eyes never leaving Whitman's. "They fired me." A beat of silence on the other end. "What?" came the voice, sharp now. "Who's in the room?" Alyssa held the phone out slightly. "Karen Ellison from HR, a compliance officer I don't know, and Dr. Charles Whitman." On the other end there was movement, a rustle of papers, the scrape of a chair. "Stay there. I'm on my way." Then the line went dead. Karen slowly turned toward Whitman. "Did she just say Dad?" Whitman's face had gone pale. "Who was that?" Karen asked, voice rising. Alyssa placed her phone back in her bag and sat down again. "You didn't check, did you?" she said, almost kindly. "You looked at my credentials, my school, my recommendations, but you never looked at my emergency contact," Karen whispered. "Oh, my God." "Dr. Marcus Coleman," Alyssa said. "Chief of Surgery, East River Medical." Outside the window, the morning sun broke through the clouds and poured into the room like gold. The compliance officer shifted uncomfortably in his seat. 15 minutes later, footsteps echoed down the hallway, measured, unhurried, but unmistakably purposeful. The door opened, and Marcus Coleman entered. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a navy suit and gray tie, his face was unreadable, but his presence was volcanic. He didn't sit, he didn't shake hands. He simply looked at his daughter, then turned to the others. "Start talking." What followed was a blur of half-statements, backpedals, jargon. Whitman tried to control the narrative. Karen cited procedure. The compliance officer offered vague assurances about investigative process. But Marcus was unmoved. "I want full transcripts," he said. "All incident reports, emails, chart logs, personnel notes. I want them printed, indexed, and sent to my office by 3:00 p.m. today." Whitman tried to interrupt. "This is a personnel matter. It doesn't fall under your division." "I'm chief of surgery," Marcus said. "This hospital runs on my signature. This falls under everything I care about." He turned to Karen. "And if you allowed yourself to be used for retaliation against a nurse doing her job, you'll be held accountable too." Karen looked stricken. Then he looked at Alyssa. "You okay?" She nodded. He turned back to the table. "This meeting is over." The walk back to the cardiac floor was quiet. Staff parted for them without being asked. Some glanced up from their computers. Others looked away. At the nurse's station, Linda stood frozen, watching the two of them approach. Her eyes darted between Alyssa and the man beside her. Marcus offered a short nod. "You must be Morales." "Yes, sir." "Thank you for looking out for my daughter." Linda blinked. "Anytime." Then he turned back to Alyssa. "I'll handle the administration, but I need to know, do you want to stay?" Alyssa took a moment. Then she said, "Yes, but not in silence." Marcus smiled just a little. "Good." And just like that, everything changed. Dr. Marcus Coleman walked through East River's cardiac wing like a quiet storm, not with noise, not with raised voices, but with an unmistakable presence that bent the air around him. It was just after 9:00 a.m. The floor had already been buzzing for hours. Rounds were in motion, families in and out, monitors humming, and the smell of coffee lingering faintly from the staff lounge. But the moment Dr. Coleman stepped onto the floor, everything paused. He wasn't wearing his white coat today, just a crisp charcoal suit, polished shoes, and a silver tie clip shaped like a surgical scalpel. Under one arm, he held a leather folder. His face was unreadable. At the nurse's station, Linda Morales looked up and stood immediately. "He's here," she muttered to no one in particular. Alyssa stood beside her, still in her scrubs, still technically terminated, pending whatever investigation was being drafted in some quiet office on the top floor. But her badge remained clipped to her chest, and her spine was still straight. "You ready?" Marcus asked her softly. She nodded. "Good. Let's go make it official." The hospital board had agreed, under considerable pressure, to hold an emergency administrative review. It wasn't a courtroom, not quite, but it had the same feel. A long oak table, neutral-colored chairs, a projector screen, coffee that no one touched. Dr. Ewan was there, so was Linda, two physicians from other departments. Karen Ellison sat near the corner, face pale and lips pressed thin. Whitman was present too, slouched in his seat, arms crossed, trying not to look like the man being investigated. Marcus began without introduction. "I'd like to begin by acknowledging that this meeting should never have been necessary." He placed the leather folder on the table, opened it, pulled out 3 neatly clipped stacks of paper. Inside are incident reports, patient charts, and system logs, all connected to the alleged performance issues of nurse Alyssa Coleman. He turned to the group. Every one of those concerns is either unsubstantiated, misrepresented, or based on assumptions rather than facts. What you'll also find, highlighted, is that her assessments led to 3 course corrections that likely prevented adverse outcomes. Dr. Ewan leaned forward. She caught my error with Mr. Chen. His potassium levels were borderline. Her recommendation led us to catch an arrhythmia before it became critical. Linda added, She saved our team more than once. When others were just following orders, she asked the right questions. That's nursing. Whitman scoffed. So we're rewarding rule-breaking now? No, Marcus said, turning toward him. We're holding accountable the culture that punishes competence when it threatens egos. Whitman's mouth twitched. This is about favoritism. She's your daughter. Marcus smiled coldly. I didn't reveal our connection for a reason. She wanted to earn her place, not be handed one, and she did. You just couldn't stand that someone who looked like her, talked like her, and didn't fear you was better at this than you are. Gasps were quiet but audible around the table. Karen glanced at Whitman, then looked away. Marcus continued. You manipulated schedules, suppressed evidence, weaponized procedure. You turned this hospital, my hospital, into your personal chessboard. He placed a final document on the table. This is your exit agreement. Sign it, and you leave quietly. Refuse, and we open a full inquiry, starting with your prior disciplinary warning from 3 years ago. Yes, I have that file too. Whitman's eyes widened. You wouldn't... I would, and I will. The silence that followed was long and heavy. Then slowly, Whitman reached for the pen. His hand trembled. He signed. Marcus nodded. You have until end of day to collect your things. As Whitman stood and walked out, no one met his eye. Not even Karen. After the door closed, Marcus turned back to the room. This isn't just about one man. It's about how easily silence becomes policy, about how we confuse compliance with safety. That ends today. He looked at his daughter. I don't want her to be the exception. I want her to be the standard. The meeting adjourned quietly, but the ripple effect began immediately. By lunchtime, the nursing floor buzzed not with gossip, but with relief. Staff whispered, smiled, even congratulated Alyssa as she returned to the floor. No one spoke about Whitman, not directly, but his absence was a presence all its own. Linda caught up with her near the medication room. You good? She asked. Alyssa smiled faintly. Getting there. You did it. No, Alyssa replied, glancing down the hall where younger nurses were gathered, comparing patient notes. We did. 6 months later, East River Medical didn't just look different. It felt different. The walls hadn't changed. The lights still flickered occasionally in hallway 3B. The elevators still groaned when they were too full. But something had shifted, in the air, in the rhythm, in the way people walked and talked and listened. Alyssa Coleman stepped off the elevator that Monday morning and was met by the scent of fresh brewed coffee and the sound of laughter from the nurses' lounge. The shift board had been updated again, but now it included a rotating mentorship schedule. Every week, a newer nurse was paired with a more experienced one for rounds and discussion. She checked her badge, her new one. Clinical practice lead, nursing innovation. It still felt surreal sometimes. Morning, boss, Linda Morales said, raising her cup from behind the nurse's station. I told you to stop calling me that, Linda smirked. You keep taking meetings with DC. I'm not stopping. Alyssa laughed and leaned against the counter. Any fires this morning? Mr. Carter's daughter brought in a second opinion from Google. We had to explain that YouTube is not accredited medical literature. Alyssa grinned. I'll go talk to her. The day flowed the way days did now, busy but balanced. Alyssa walked through the halls not as a disruptor, but as a leader. Nurses stopped her with questions. Techs asked for input. Residents treated her like an ally, not a threat. In the staff lounge, a new bulletin board had gone up. Voices from the floor. Notes from staff, anonymously or signed, highlighted everything from safety concerns to success stories. It wasn't mandatory, but it was read, and it mattered. Later that afternoon, Alyssa held a small debrief with 3 newly hired nurses. She guided them through a complex cardiac chart, listened to their interpretations, then said gently, "And what's missing?" They looked at the data. Then one of them, a soft-spoken young man named Theo, said, "The patient's story." Alyssa smiled. "Exactly. Never treat a number. Treat a person." The group nodded. Notes were scribbled. Questions followed. Afterward, Linda caught up with her near the cafe. "You remember your first week?" Linda asked. Alyssa rolled her eyes. "Which part? The impossible schedule, or being told I was just a nurse?" Linda chuckled. "Both. I was going to quit, retire early, get out before the place burned me out." "What changed?" Linda sipped her coffee. Watching you stand your ground made me believe again." Alyssa didn't respond. Her throat tightened slightly. "Anyway," Linda added, patting her shoulder, "don't let it get to your head, boss." That evening, just before heading out, Alyssa received a call from Dr. Ewan. "Got a letter for you," she said. "A letter?" "Invitation. National Nursing Leadership Summit. They want you to speak. Panel on Institutional Reform." Alyssa blinked. "Are you serious?" Apparently, word gets around. Later that night, Alyssa sat on her apartment balcony, letter in hand, tea steaming gently beside her. The city moved beneath her feet. Traffic, lights, horns. But up here, it was quiet. She thought of that first day. The stairs, the warnings, the fear she buried under calm. The folder she built, page by page, like armor. And then she thought of what came after, what remained. Her voice, her purpose, her place. She picked up her phone and called her father. "Hey, Dad." "You all right?" he asked. "Yeah. They want me to speak in D.C." There was a pause. "Then go tell them the truth." Alyssa smiled. "I will." Sometimes the most powerful changes begin in the quietest moments. In a hospital hallway where voices used to be silenced, Alyssa Coleman's quiet strength shifted not just policies, but perspectives. She didn't yell, she didn't rebel. She simply stood, steadily, day after day, until the system had no choice but to face its own reflection. Her journey reminds us that even in places built on hierarchy and habit, the truth can still find its voice when carried by someone who refuses to let it go unheard. At its heart, this story isn't just about a nurse. It's about dignity, about what it means to hold on to one's worth when others try to write you out. Alyssa never sought recognition. She sought responsibility. She didn't fight to be seen because she was special, but because she believed the system owed that visibility to everyone, especially those from the Black community who are too often overlooked, dismissed, or underestimated, not because of lack of skill, but because of quiet bias wrapped in professional language. She proved that leadership doesn't always wear a title, that strength can sound like a soft voice in a loud room, and that standing up for what's right doesn't require grand gestures, only consistent truth. In doing so, Alyssa didn't just reclaim her place. She reimagined it, not for herself, but for others like her, for every nurse, every voice, every member of the Black community who's ever been told to stay in their place. The lesson is simple, but not easy. Hold your ground, even when the floor shakes, because sometimes the cost of silence is greater than the risk of speaking. And justice, real justice, often starts as a whisper before it becomes a movement. Like a lantern left glowing quietly in a hospital window, a steady light has the power to guide others through the darkest corridors. Alyssa became that light, not just for herself, but for her patients, her peers, and for a system that had long forgotten how to see clearly. So now, take a breath. Think about the Alyssas you've met in your own life, the ones who go unseen but change everything. And if this story touched something in you, if it stirred a memory, a hope, or a truth long buried, consider sharing it. Pass it along to someone who may need reminding that dignity doesn't have to shout to be heard. Especially in the Black community, where resilience often blooms in silence, let us lift those stories up, because every time we do, we bring a little more light to a world that desperately needs it.